As was announced, I led a tour to China in September of 9 other metalsmiths. And it was through the auspices of the China Workers Center for International Exchange. They got a hold of my name and looked at my resume and decided I'd be someone that they might trust to bring a group of professionals over, and the whole idea is that they want professionals to come and meet professionals in the same profession and cut out all the governmental and tourist kind of stuff and just sit down and talk and exchange and see what can come of making friends and getting to know what's going on. And it sounded like a great idea. What I'm going to do in this lecture, however, is to sort of combine that and sort of tell you a little background about that. When I retired in 2006, I gave myself a present, and I signed up to go on one of Ron Ho's wonderful trips to Southeast Asia. That trip in February of 2007 was to Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand, and Vietnam. And my favorite part of that trip was when I was in northern Vietnam near the Chinese border and we were seeing some of these hill tribe people. It just excited me so much that here are cultures where their beautiful embroidery and jewelry is still being done and still a part of their culture. They haven't really lost it all yet. It's starting to go, but we just encountered these women on the trail and they're wearing these really incredibly embroidered pieces of clothing. So after that tour was over, the official tour, I stayed on a few days, went into Thailand and up to Chiang Mai, northern Thailand, where there are a lot of minority and hill tribe people, and a lot of their things are for sale in the marketplace. And I bought a few pieces of jewelry. I bought some jewelry of them. I bought this piece, which is from the hill tribes. And then I bought some pieces from galleries that I really liked the wire work in it. And I didn't know which tribe it was from, but it just intrigued me. And they weren't too expensive. So then on the way home, I stopped in Hong Kong to visit my sister-in-law, Yo-Yo, and her daughter, my niece, on the right there, Edith, who is a textile designer. So I showed them my jewelry. Edith took pictures and she sent them to a friend of theirs who lives in Taiwan, who's a photographer and has spent 20 years going into China and photographing the minority tribes and publishing books on their costumes and jewelry. I have these books here if you want to see them later. And his name is Rames. His American name, English name is Rames. And Rames wrote back to Edith and he said, uh-oh, Auntie Mary got cheated. She bought fake Miao jewelry. She didn't buy real Miao jewelry. She better come on our next research trip and learn what real Miao jewelry is like. And I went, yes. So he actually arranged in the fall, October of 2008, he arranged a trip for my sister-in-law Yo-Yo and a friend of hers, myself, and my nieces and friends of theirs to go into Guizhou, up into the mountains, and visit some of the metalsmiths in the villages that he had encountered before and had contact with. So I was going to be going up there, and I told my friend Zi Lin, who teaches at painting at the University of Washington, and he said, as long as you're in China, why don't you stop by Hangzhou and the China Academy of Art and give a lecture on your work? I'll arrange for it through people I know there. Okay, sure. So we did that after the trip to Guizhou. When I was in Hangzhou, and it's just what happens when you take these opportunities. So I go to Hangzhou, I give my lecture. We happen to meet a professor from Shanghai, and he hears about the lecture, and he says, won't you come to our university and give your lecture? Well, it's a 2-hour train ride, so let's go to Shanghai. Went to Shanghai, and at that lecture, I met the people who teach metals at Shanghai University. So I came back from this trip, just a wonderful trip. I came back, and that's when I got invited to lead this other trip to China. I couldn't believe it. So they said, we want you to bring some metalsmiths to China. Where do you want to go, and what do you want to do? I thought, well, let's divide it into going to Hangzhou and Shanghai and meeting again with the jewelry students and professors and see their program. And then let's go up into the mountains and see some ethnic, tribal, minority jewelry and costumes. I've already seen the Miao, so I think I'd like to go to Sichuan and see some of these Tibetan minorities. I've got books that picture this and it looks pretty incredible. I want to know more about it. So we were all set to do that until there were floods in August in Sichuan, and we had to pull out of that. So at the last minute, I thought, well, I've got a group of people together already. I'm committed to giving them a good trip, and I know they'll have a fantastic time if we go back to Guizhou. So that's how the trip came about. In Guizhou, the Miao and other minority women, young girls, will wear these absolutely incredible costumes. They start learning embroidery at 6 or 7, and it takes them about 9 years to make their outfit. And then the family starts buying them silver jewelry, and they can be wearing over 20 kilos if they're really dressed. Each one, and then they all deck out during festival time, and it's pretty spectacular. Now, my time was already set, and it wasn't a festival time, but I wasn't too sad about that, because at festival time, everybody closes their shops, and you're not going to get into the metalsmith studios, and I wanted to get in and meet the metalsmiths. So that's what we were going to do. So we gathered in Shanghai and went first to the, saw some of Shanghai, and we're going to go to the university there. Shanghai is 20 million people. It's huge. There are so many skyscraper buildings. We were in a hotel about 45 minutes out of town, out of the middle of the town, and the entire drive back and forth each day was on a highway, and we were passing all these pretty incredible shaped buildings, not just square ones, but some pretty interesting ones. The highway is sort of like Alaska Way Viaduct on steroids. You know, it's huge. Up there, zooming over everything else going down below, past some very interesting architecture, I thought. This is what I was really noticing in Shanghai, was the tops of the buildings in particular are, well, they're each unique, and I don't really think they're used for anything except to make them distinguished from each other. I really can't see how much could be going on inside of those twisted things. Now, the remnants of the older apartment buildings you can see on the left there. Not too many stories high and look sort of regular with peaked roofs. And then they started building the taller square apartment buildings. And lately, their apartment buildings are getting little cupolas put on top, which is quite curious to me. So you'll have this huge building, many stories high, and this little crown sitting on top. When you get out into the suburbs, the lower story, 4, 5, 6-story houses also have the little cupola put on top. Just sort of curious architecture to me. So we spent the first day in Shanghai going to the International Expo, where again we were looking at architecture. So the spaceship landed there. There's another one that has LED displays that are flashing different things, advertisements or whatever on them. The Taiwanese pavilion had this huge sphere inside that was all flashing different things. You had tent-like things suspended out to give shade in the summer, or in our case, a little bit of keeping the rain off of us, because it was raining almost the whole time we were there. Some buildings, we never found out which pavilion this was. It was just a very strange structure. Saudi Arabia had their, sand dunes. And Holland had a tulip and a daffodil, and then a whole bunch of little structures up on this ramp. So the architecture, again, was really interesting. This is maybe my favorite building, Korea, and it used text in a very interesting way. Three-dimensional there, and then their kanji written. Russia, was taking patterns from the tile and textiles of some of their different ethnic groups. Spain had sort of rush matting on a superstructure outside of the building. Canada had lumber, of course, wood, on the outside of theirs. And Germany, pretty interesting. Now, we didn't get in all these buildings because the lines were very long. USA, well. Really sort of looks like an airport, doesn't it, guys? Yeah. I was a little embarrassed here. Yeah. But a lot of people wanted to get in. You can see the line to get into USA, of course. And they were very well behaved. We did get into Vietnam because that line wasn't so long. And the Vietnam pavilion was interesting. They were making sort of like a Gothic cathedral out of bamboo. But some of the countries that didn't have money to spend on a major structure, what this piece of land is going to be in the future is an industrial park. So it looked like they had built a lot of very serviceable square buildings, and then a number of smaller countries went and just clad them and made them somehow unique, just putting things on the outside. And you can see the building in under Brazil's forest of sticks there. Poor Kazakhstan just put a few banners on the outside. You can see their gray buildings still. So we spent a day there, and then what we do every lunch and every dinner is we had a banquet on a round table with a lazy Susan in the middle. Now from left to right, Teresa Ferris from Whitewater, Wisconsin, and Donna Swigert. Some of you may remember Donna, who was here for a while. She's down in Pan American, Texas. Peggy Ng from St. Louis, and Linda Watson from Santa Cruz. Bob Coogan from Appalachian Center. Sarah Perkins from Missouri, and Don Friedlich from Madison. Susan Hamlet from UMass Dartmouth. Phil Renato, name used to be Rizzy when he was here. Phil Renato from Kendall in Pennsylvania, and group leader me. So, boy, the food was good. I love Chinese food, and it was great. We would have maybe only 9 dishes for lunch, and then 6 hours later, we'd have 12 dishes for dinner. Never get tired of Chinese food. So the next day we go to Shanghai University. It's a little bit outside of town, so it has space to spread out with a nice campus. And the Fine Arts College is in this building. The metals studio, you come in from the hallway, and there are showcases and faculty offices, and you feed into a main workroom downstairs with enameling, casting, a big hood at one end, forming equipment and all at the other. You go up the stairs to the second floor, and there are more bench spaces and workspaces, a few more showcases for student work. And you can see sort of halfway up there is a seminar room. That's where we spent the afternoon with question and answer with students. From there, looking down. The showcases had examples of recent student projects. So it's a contemporary art-based jewelry program. It's not a trade-based program. Program's head by Shannon Gall, and she got her MFA in the US, studied with Linda LaRoche at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. She went there in 1980, back to Shanghai in 80, started teaching their glass program, and then started their metals program about 83. So it's been going since then. She also runs a gallery in downtown Shanghai, a crafts gallery called Two Cities Gallery that has exhibitions and publishes catalogs. And she had done a great job of organizing this, had let people know all over, and we had students, we went across town, across campus, to a large auditorium to give our lecture. And we had probably 200 students there. They had come from, one group took a bus for 4 hours to get there. We heard one girl took a 10-hour train ride to get there. They are hungry for information. We gave our presentations in the morning, had lunch, and then went to that seminar room and spent the afternoon there. They gave a presentation of their curriculum to us. There were 2 other schools in Shanghai represented, so we got a look at 3 different kinds of programs, student work, and then we spent the rest of the time question and answer. They wanted to know, how did metals develop in the US? What do students ask? They ask, what do you do after you get out? How do you break into the field? How do you set up your studio? All the same kind of questions as our students would be asking. And here we are. Now, in the trip, the actual trip, we went into Shanghai, up to the mountains, and out Hangzhou. But I want to group them here for the educational interchange and then up to the mountains. So in Hangzhou, we went to China Academy of Art, one of the 2 main art schools in China, the other being in Beijing. And it is so large, it is located on 3 campuses. So they have the fine arts campus downtown, and then outside of town they're building this brand new architecture and public art campus, under which glass, ceramics, and metals is housed. They have 3 faculty here. Vivian is the girl that I'm speaking to in the yellow. I know her best. She speaks English. The other 2 don't, so we have to converse through translators. And we showed our lectures in a library seminar room. That's the library in behind. They had just started their semester, so that they didn't have time to do as much pre-planning. They didn't draw people from all over, so we were talking primarily to their own students. They have classes of 15 per year, and they're set up very similar to the way we are. It's a 4-year program. The first year is basics, 2 years of skill acquisition, and then a final year of thesis preparation. Each one of us was given 10 minutes to give a presentation, which means 5 minutes of talking and 5 minutes of translation. So we boiled our presentation down to 5 minutes. And then we loaded all of our images into one program. Phil Renato, being the computer whiz he is, he sat down with us and got them all into one program, and then he had made up these title slides for us. So we wanted to let them know that we came from all over the country, and then as each one of us started our talk, then they could visually see where we came from. And our guide here is translating. I'll say a sentence, she'll translate back and forth. After lunch, we saw their program and some of their student work. And I was really interested to see that one of the very first projects they give is a sheet of copper, saw into it, bend it out into a form, which is the project that I've been giving my beginners for years. Very quickly, they also work with other materials. This is paper. They work with a lot of glass combinations, because that's what one of the faculty does. They keep a notebook on their experiments. When they're learning about patinas, they're sent home and with some copper, and they're told to experiment with all the cleaning supplies and their cosmetics and see what all these different things that they use in the house will do to copper. There's a lot of design study, and that you see this sort of related when you see their final thesis projects, undergrad thesis projects. It's contemporary work, it's body-oriented work. It's very dramatically presented. And I was asking the students, it's either runway look or fashion magazine look. And I said, well, who's doing your photography? And they said, we are. We're taught to present our work. So after we had an afternoon give and take session where they were asking, is there more we can do to interchange, maybe set up an international website and we can have like exhibitions. We were even talking about a physical exhibition, bringing some of their work over and mounting it at a SOFA exhibition at some point. And Don even talked to the people in SOFA, emailed them, and they're quite interested. So we're hopeful that some actual concrete exchange can come out of this. After all those conversations, we walked across campus to their new building. It was just being finished in September. They were to move into it in October. It's a building to house ceramics, glass, and metals. Very nice architecture, high ceilings. They're going to have these several large rooms with smaller ancillary rooms around. The benches that were there, but all the new equipment was being ordered from Germany. So they were going to top of the line. So they're really going to have a spectacular program. They have undergrads and grad program. And Vivian is working on her PhD in sculpture, a combination sculpture and jewelry. It's architecture college, and the architecture is really very interesting. Question?
How many people are at this?
15 per class per year, for 11 per level. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, well, at the school.
That I don't have, yeah. I'd have to ask, yeah. I didn't get that. I have a question about the spaces inside and how they function. When I was in their studio, I saw a stairwell go up, but then there was this funny space between the stairwell and the wall that seemed to be able to be used for anything because things didn't quite, the angles are crazy. So I'm wondering if the architect isn't making a building that isn't totally useful on the inside, as some of them do sometimes. At any rate, after we were finished in Shanghai, we flew to Guiyang, which is the capital of Guizhou. Guizhou is a province in south-central China, in the mountains. It's not really crowded compared to other places in China. It has a high percentage of minority, non-Chinese, non-Han Chinese minority farmers, not very wealthy by Chinese standards, but really beautiful. They're farming rice and corn. The highway was well used by trucks. I can't tell you how many of these we passed. There are 24 vehicles on that truck. I couldn't believe the way they stack them in. So we landed in Guiyang. We spent a day there seeing the city, and then we took a 2-hour drive to Kaili, which is a smaller city, sort of east and a little bit south of Guiyang, in the heart of the Miao area. Well known for that, and a lot of tourists come to see the different Miao tribes and their festivals. It's well known for a sour fish soup, and we loved it. It was very good, the local fare there. We came to see the Miao silver and costumes. Now, the Miao is the largest minority with 5 million some individuals. It's broken into many subgroups. So the Shidong Miao here will wear this beautiful red embroidery underneath all of this silver. And the headdresses are filigree, they're chasing. The necklaces, the torque necklaces are solid, more solid work with a lot of little dangles down. And then a lot of these repoussé plaques are sewn onto the costume. Their embroidery is known for this kind of figurative work. Silk embroidery on a cotton or a ramie indigo cloth. And you can see how they do the embroidery. They're covering over a cut paper pattern that they lay on. Now, a little bit different. This is Guye, and she's got sort of bird feather, not really cow horns, but more like bird tail feathers, indication on her headdress. Some of the same necklaces, the same idea of sewing plaques onto the clothing. But their embroidery is made up of strips of ribbon that are folded into little triangles and then stitched down, one over another, over another, over another, until they get these very tiny, built up, and this piece is up here on the table, you can see this. Another group, and the patches on her arms, the embroidery there is sort of a more textured, more 3D. And it's made up of a braid that they make on a little stand that they have. And they'll make that like that red and green strip braid. And then they'll take that braid and pleat it or accordion it and stitch it down so that it gets all nubby like that. This piece is also up on the table. Lange tribe or group, subgroup, has yet another kind of necklace, and they're the group that does the tin embroidery, like the jacket that I'm wearing. So there'll be, before they dye the cloth, they'll lay in all the stitches, sort of floating a stitch, maybe like a 1/4 inch, where they want all the little tin pieces. And then after the cloth has been dyed, they'll take strips of tin, feed them under that, and bend them around so that they're little clipped on to each one of these embroidery stitches is how that's done. You can see that close up. So there's a lot of variation in the embroidery, and I swear I've never seen such beautiful embroidery anywhere else in the world. I cannot believe what they're doing with embroidery. And the women are still doing it. You'll see them do it, at least the older, middle-aged and older women are still doing it all the time. So we wanted to get out of Kylie into some villages. And as I said, it's very mountainous. It's very humid. It's always hazy. At least both times I've been there, it's usually hazy.
Is that smog?
It's not so much smog, it's just very humid. When they burn the fields at that time of year, it's going to be more smoke in the air, but this was just, it was rainy, like today. The villages are often on a hillside, so that one house is up above the next, and they are wooden and or some stone, maybe brick. They're a little more prosperous.
What was the yellow stuff?
It was corn that's drying under the eaves, and it'll be fed to the pigs. Now here's where I'm going to combine trips. So I first want to show you a man we visited on my first trip in '08. We went to this one village to see Mr. Lee. And Mr. Lee is a silversmith in Guizhou who was voted one of the top 10 traditional, like a living treasure, craftsmen. And he invited us into his home, which was his studio, the front room. And, okay, if I can go back, I can hit the right one, yes. With us was Professor Yang. Professor Yang teaches at the local college, teaches minority studies, and he is a minority himself. And he was along to not translate, but to answer questions specific to why do they do this, what does that mean, kind of thing. So Professor Craftsman Lee showed us his chasing process. He's got his designs, he's got his white metal mold, male and female molds that he will press the metal in between to start the chasing to get a design going, and then using tools that we pretty much understand, and then chases right on that metal mold. Making plaques to sew onto the clothing or to use in the headdresses, using little dragons, fish, butterflies, flowers, and the motifs that they use. And the Miao love bright silver. This is fine silver, and they don't oxidize it, they keep it bright. He was commissioned to make a headdress of the local style for a museum in Beijing, and he was just finishing it up. He brought it out to show us. And so the phoenix there shows the traditional filigree, where a twisted wire will be soldered in the pattern on a flat sheet, cut out around it, and then a little bit of doming done on the sheet.
Mary, how do they clean it when it starts to tarnish?
They have a pickle that uses a particular plant. There's a plant there that they crush in water, and it's a cleaning agent. Yeah.
They dip it then?
They soak it in it and then use a brass brush, just like we do. They also use some filigree that I recognize more from European style work. And then a lot of little dangles around the forehead, made out of very thin metal. I would guess at least 30 gauge. His book of designs that he bends his wires to, and then a whole bunch of wires that he's pre-bent, and some components he's made, waiting to be put into place. So he gave us a demo on how he does it. He picks up little pieces and he sets them down onto the piece of metal in its design, spreads on the flux, and then takes a bamboo with powdered solder, taps on it, and sprinkles out the solder chips. Suspends it out so that he can take his torch and solder up from the bottom. So pretty understandable. So we walked over to this 3-story, more prosperous looking house, Mr. Wu. Mr. Wu is sort of like the local metal supplier, and he's done quite well. And actually, I visited his home on both trips. He buys silver from the mines in another province, about 15 kilo chunks, and cuts it up under his power hammer, and then casts a smaller ingot, rolls it out in his power rolling mills. And so he can supply wire or sheet stock to a lot of other craftsmen. And he also showed us how chasing is done with a copper master casting a white metal mold up against it and then hammering thin sheets in between those two to get a start on your chasing instead of starting with a flat sheet and pitch. When someone gave us a tour or to the faculty at the schools, we felt we needed to give them a present. That's big in China, you give gifts. And so what we did before we left is we published a book. Don Friedlich helped us do it. We sent him pictures of our work, and he went through mypublisher.com and did one of these print-on-demand books. I got the cover because I was group leader. But inside, there was just a little bit of English text on each of us, and then each of us had a picture of ourselves and 3 pages of our work. So people that didn't read English could go, oh, yeah, that's okay, yeah. And I saw them doing that. Oh, and then they'd smile when they recognized us, and then they could see what our work looked like. So it worked out very well. After we left Mr. Wu's, we walked down the alley that his house was right behind me. We walked down this alley and looking in the doors to see other craftsmen working in their front. Their front room was also their studio. And this gentleman was going to show us how to do one of the braided bracelets. So here they are, and he had one half done. So he starts in the middle, he works out in both directions to get the taper, and he works around a wooden core. So I think you can imagine how he's just flipping one wire up to do that braid. When he's finished, he's going to burn out the core and then roll it to even it out and then bend it around to finish out the bracelet. Now on my first trip there, he sold every bracelet he had. Let me tell you, the girls descended. And the one in black is Cece Wong, and she teaches the metals program at Baptist University in Hong Kong. So the next day in the 08 trip, we took a 2-hour bus ride on a road and then 10 kilometers up a very narrow dirt road to the village of Kongbai. Kongbai has become very famous for their silversmiths. Mr. Lee was a famous silversmith who did traditional designs for commission the girls in his village. All traditional that way. Up in Kongbai, they would take apprentices, they would apprentice anyone, whereas Mr. Lee might only teach his son. But in Kongbai, they taught anyone how to do it, so there became too many metalsmiths in this town, so they became itinerant. And they traveled around to villages that didn't have metalsmiths and would do any design that was asked. Kongbai had, in '07, one report I read, they had 202 families, 198 were in the silver working trade. This is a village of silversmiths. That's what they do in the winter when they're not out in the fields. So they do both. Walking up the narrow pathway, again, it was on a hillside. Their houses, lower level for animals, storage, latrine, upper level for living. And they usually have this large, not a picture window, but this large open space with like a window seat, a chair right in there looking out from the living room. And when we got there, we went to Professor Yang's nephew's house. So this is also Craftsman Yang in the corner there getting ready for his demo while his wife is cooking lunch. And of course I wanted to help on their big walk in the kitchen. They set 2 small tables with a pot of soup in the middle and the dishes around the side, and we all sat down and had a wonderful lunch. And we all were looking at Mrs. Yang's hairdo, and so we prevailed upon her to take her hair down and show us how she put it up. So we went out to the back porch, and when she took it down, we found out she had two hair pieces in there too. So she combed it and then tied it in a little ponytail right at the top of her head, and then started tying in her hair pieces, and then did a fancy flip with her arm to get like a little knot up there. And then with the rest that was left over, she took a piece of yarn and just bound around it, flipped that up and around, and then put in her hair pieces. Pretty cool. So now Mr. Yang built up his charcoal fire. He's an itinerant smith, so his toolkit was different from Mr. Lee's. Simpler tools, lightweight, and so it was interesting to see the difference, to end up with the same product. He built his fire, he cast an ingot for us, and then cut it in half, and the first half he forged out into a rod, a wire. Second half, then he forged out into a piece of sheet. Okay. Then he took one of his copper master forms that had been chased and put a piece of copper around it, bound it, and it was in the middle there. Melted some white metal, and I'm calling it white metal because I don't know what the composition is, whether it's lead, whether it's pewter, whether it's some sort of combination with bismuth. I just don't know what it was. And I was asking, but the translation didn't, I guess my translator didn't know all the specific names for metals. So he melts that, he pours it into half of that mold, cools it down, flips it over, and then pours in the other half, quenches it in a bowl of water, and then breaks it apart. So he's got a male-female mold, and that he can preform, start his chasing, and notice his pitch block there. So just hammers a little bit and gets that far with his chased form. Warms up his pitch block over the charcoal, smooths it out with a hammer just like I do, and melts a little pitch in the back of the embossed form and sticks it on. He's ready to chase. So this all made sense. I understood everything going on here. Great. It's the way I would have done it. I don't have a big block like that, but it works well for flatter things. Then we went outside. We'd already had a chasing demonstration. So we went outside and he showed us how he draws wire. By golly, he's got a draw plate with carbide inserts. Okay. No draw bench, but this works. He sharpens the point on the end with his agricultural knife. And when he gets it thin enough, he takes 2 of his wife's sewing needles, binds them together, oils everything, and pulls the wire through so he's putting a flat on it. So that when he rolls it, you get that rolled look, twisted look. Then he can bend up, just like Mr. Lee showed us. Now to solder, he's not going to drag a torch from village to village. He has a little bit of kerosene there and a copper tube that he puts some rag cotton wooling through, and has a blowpipe. So he's soldering by blowpipe. That's what the blowpipe looks like. So then in the evening, back in the hotel, Professor Yang brings out his own personal collection of this stuff, and he starts explaining about what the motifs mean. The dragon versus, they have many dragons, whereas the Chinese, after a while, settled on one dragon, but the Miao keep the older system of having many different dragons that mean many different things. And a group of hairpins, a headband, and a pectoral necklace. He also had examples of all this embroidery spread out on the bed. And since I was the only one with hair, a lot of hair, they tried out all the hair pieces on me. I don't have as much hair as Mrs. Yang, though. They were a little not quite stable in there. And dinner at a friend's house, a friend of Rames's in a nearby village, hosted us for a wonderful banquet dinner. The local people say it's not really a good banquet dinner if you can still see the table. So the dishes were put in between dishes and they were piled up, and we just had our chopsticks and you were grabbing whatever you wanted to eat. Then the ladies would come around singing and encouraging you to drink rather strong liquor out of these little cups. And things pretty soon got way out of hand. And people jumped up and they're clapping together the little benches in sort of a rhythm, and everyone's singing, and this one woman is chasing people around with a chicken head on top of a chopstick. Okay, so back in Kylie City and back to the metalsmiths group just last September. We were looking around for the store that I remembered going to 2 years previously, and we happened on this fairly newly built, since I was there before, arcade place. 2 alleys had been closed in, and it was all silver shops, lining 2 sides of 2 alleys. And a few of them went through in between. It was silver, selling the silver out of the showcases, but it was also their studios in behind. So I think some of the people from Kongbai have moved to town, and they're starting to make jewelry there for in town, also for export or for sale to tourists. So they had pretty complete studio setups, and doing everything from casting ingots, forging things down, to doing steam casting right there. Some of their equipment was out in the middle of the alley, and they were wondering how they clean things. So they've got brass brushes and they're scrubbing them to get them the bright white. Now there are traditional designs. This chain on top, a little out of focus on top of the case here, is a traditional Miao chain. Down in underneath you see some little more contemporary trinkets, little hearts and commercial chains, along with some Miao design. And the whole group were very interested and became rabid shoppers. I didn't know I had such a shopping group with me until we hit that silver market. I couldn't get them away. Very nice quality work and high quality silver. Really pretty torques. Phil even found another plug for his ear. He's got pretty big holes in his ear. It's one of those guys with piercings. Now, in looking at the silver work, I started noticing, a variety of quality. So you see the traditional, where there is a twisted wire soldered around to make the design. It's cut out and put together. Then you see some where obviously they have made one of those molds from a real silver one. And then you see some where they didn't even bother with that, and they sort of crudely cut it out. And then some is made out of nickel silver and plated silver. So you've got a whole range of quality and material workmanship. Wherever we went, there were ladies following us, trying to sell us stuff. Now, they were good-natured. They were out in front of the hotel. I think they probably bribed our bus driver, because we would be driven somewhere for lunch, and when we came out from the restaurant, they were there waiting for us. And they also did a brisk business. See that woman holding the crown there in the middle? Here's Don wearing his new crown. So I wanted, the 2 years previous, Rames had taken us to an area in town where a lot of the Kumbai metalsmiths had moved, and they were working in nickel silver to do the cheaper production work. And I wanted to find that area of town again, and the last morning I finally found it. We walked up the alley and we saw this gentleman just working on his front stoop, and asked him if he'd show us what he was doing. He had a bunch of stampings there, and he was bending them into those little hang-you-down dangles, forehead dangles. So he showed us his mold, his die, which is one female die out of steel, because he's working in nickel silver, not fine silver. So he needs something a little stronger. He takes a piece of nickel silver and pounds it with the sole of an old shoe, and gets a soft impression. And then he starts pounding it with a strip of white metal again, and really pounding it. And as that spreads out, he just folds it over and keeps pounding and pounding until he gets a very nice impression, pretty crisp. And this piece is up here too, if you want to see it. That whole area, every little doorway, houses a family that's a silversmith. Husband and wife work together. You can just peek indoors and you'll see the bed in the corner, the TV in the corner, the cook pot in the corner, and the studio. I mean, like 4 corners, you got the 4. That's what they have to live with. And then 1 light bulb hanging down. And each family is specializing in one type of work, one thing. So they are Miao. Their designs might be based on Miao, but they're shifting them to appeal to tourists. So things are becoming larger. They're becoming wall ornaments instead of jewelry. They're taking the dragon motif and just going overboard with it, something more elaborate or more exaggerated than the Miao would do. And they're making them out of nickel silver and plating them, which the Miao don't want if they can afford not to have. They would want fine silver. So we came out from that man's house, and of course the ladies were out front. They'd found us, and they said, you want to see someone making this kind, because we can show you, one of our relatives probably it works on this kind of necklace called the bubble necklace. So okay, we went up another alley to this family, and they brought out 2 of these tapered coils of square nickel silver wire, and he started pulling it out. And then he pulled out the other one until they were both the same length with the same amount of space in between the coils. And then he started wrapping them around a steel rod from the center up to the end. Flipped it over and did the other side. Then he handed it off to his colleague, with a pair of pliers, he started shaping or bending each little coil into line. So you can see on the left there, it's sort of messy, but then after he works on it, you can see they're all lining up a little better. Now in the meantime, the first guy's inside, and he's made the hook and eye. He's soldering them down to a piece of sheet that he's going to bend around and make into a tube, fill it with white metal, press it in a die into that bent shape, presumably melt out the white metal before he solders it onto the ends of the coil. And then they wrap it, cover it up with twisted wire. And all this is happening in their living room. That's where they work. If you're not too wealthy, you have one room. If you are wealthy, that maybe the bedroom is along the side in another room. This would be living room, kitchen, studio. So here's a family holding up the piece they did. Now, Donna bought that piece, and Phil bought another piece that they had. And then they said, okay, where do you get it plated? So they said, okay. And they took us up an alley down and across the street and around to this alley and this building. We went inside, and there were fellows with buckets of chemicals, plastic buckets of chemicals all over the wet floor, plating. They were pickling, washing, plating, rinsing, and the fumes are just coming up out of that bucket like crazy. And you see the ventilation unit up top there. That fan is pumping it right out of that little space there, that triangular space into the alley. So right across the street was finally the store I'd been looking for. This is the main wholesale store for what's being marketed internationally as Miao Yin or Miao Silver. That's the nickel silver that's been plated silver, and then it's been darkened, because they found out that the tourists really like old pieces, and old pieces have patina on them. And so they would buy them if they're got black rubbed into them. So here is floor-to-ceiling bags and bags of that stuff that are being marketed into Beijing, down into Thailand, and then from there all over. So loosely based on Miao designs. Pardon? Yeah, I didn't hear that. And so I now know why Rames said I had a fake Miao piece. So it wasn't a piece that the Miao would have used themselves, because they would only have very white looking fine silver. But I got the whole story.
So yours is nickel silver?
Mine are nickel silver. Yeah, you better believe it. I didn't. They're expensive.
Mexico too.
The real ones are very expensive. So, but okay, thank you. We can turn on the light. This, I didn't show you this tribe, but this thing goes in the middle of her back, and it counterweights her apron, like. And then this piece underneath is a baby carrier. And these long pieces are what you tie around your front, but you put the baby on your back, and you put this, and then start tying under the baby's rear, and then bind it to you, and then the babies are with mother all the time. So, are there questions?
Are you going back again?
I'd love to at some point. Nothing's planned now. Cheryl is leaving it open. She said if the trip works, which I think it did, I might get another invitation from the Chinese. Question back there.
Did the village silversmiths have much of an outlet for selling their original work?
A lot of it would be commissioned by the local women. Mr. Lee, the first guy. The second guy, Mr. Yang, would go out to villages and then do what was asked for. So traditionally, that's how they would make a living. And they would do it in the downtime, because they would be out in the fields planting rice during the main harvest time. But
And then who would he sell it to?
no, these people would be working on commission.
Right.
Now, because there are too many silversmiths now, then these younger folks have moved into Kylie City, and they are making this production work, and it's being sold all over the world. Now, everything's going to be in flux. If I go back in 2 years, I think I'll find a different situation. So everybody's trying to figure out how to find a market. Yeah. There was another question.
How long did it take them to make that necklace? Just the one where you actually were.
Under an hour. Way under an hour. Yeah, we weren't there maybe half an hour. Yeah.
Wow. You mean the loopy one?
The bubble one, yeah. So
then how much would that cost?
well, in the silver shop, I bought this for $30.
It's nickel.
It's nickel. This one, from them, I'd have to ask Phil what he paid. But I don't know, what markup? Maybe 15? See what I mean? I don't know. But probably not too much more than that.
But then, is that nickel too?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think this part's copper because the plating's rubbing off.
That would be a lot
But
of silver if it was real silver.
oh no, silver ones. They're going to do it by weight. I didn't get out one of my pieces. I have a 6-inch piece of that chain. Here it is. That I got at that silver arcade, and that cost me about close to $100. So you can see when the ladies wear they wear them this long.
So
it's an investment.
They give you a price?
Yeah. Yeah.
So Mary?
Yeah.
So in the tribes themselves, the young girls have to start collecting this. How do they afford it? I mean,
Well, it isn't just the girls that are buying it. The family buys it for their daughters.
so basically,
Some of it is inherited, and they're going to want it. It's a family pride. If you send your daughter out festival day with a measly 1 or 2 little things, everyone's going to know you're not doing too well. So it's a major thing for them. And some of the girls will go into town and get a job, working, and then use that money they earn to buy their regalia.
Does their collection belong to the family or the individual? So as they grow older, do they take it with them?
I think they do take it with them. Yeah, it's the girls. And she's working on her outfit. She's doing the sewing. Her mother is often sewing the baby carrier for her first baby. I think that's what grandmother does. And yeah.
When a woman dies, does her jewelry get melted down and the metal reused? Or do they keep the form of the jewelry?
I don't know that. I don't know that. I don't think it's buried with them. It's pretty lightweight, so I would guess a lot of it breaks after a while, and you have to have it repaired. I really don't know. That should be something I should find out.
What about the contemporary work that you showed in the beginning? Where do they market that?
That's what they're asking. Now, there are starting to be galleries. There is a lot of wealth in China. But are they interested in contemporary work yet? They've got to build that market, just like we're building our market. When I was in Hong Kong in 2008 with Ron Ho on that trip, we were going up and down Hollywood Road and all the antique shops looking for old Chinese silver things. Couldn't find any. And the people running the shops were saying, oh, we can't buy any. Everything comes on the market, the wealthy Chinese are buying. They're trying to buy back their culture. So when I got to Shanghai, through my niece again, I met one of these women who has an unlimited bankroll, and she spent the last 20 years buying stuff. She has warehouses of furniture, trunks of this stuff. And she's putting together a museum, she's putting together a whole conference center to study the old ways. As she says, well, I could buy Chanel, or, what am I going to do with my money? I met one of the wealthy Chinese. It was a fantastic trip. It's unlike anything I've ever experienced before. But they are very interested in bringing, reviving their culture. I mean, she will only wear traditional clothing, she and her husband, with the closures and all.
So what do the men wear?
Men in most cultures will lose the traditional clothing before the women. So in most cases, the men you see in just t-shirts, tennis shoes, suit jackets. Traditionally, if you look through the books, they've got pretty elaborate stuff too. Not quite as elaborate, and they don't wear as much jewelry, of course, but beautiful embroidery and this wonderful come on, Mary, the blue dye, indigo dye. The women will spin and weave the cloth. They'll grow the indigo. They'll dye it many, many times so it gets a deep, rich purple. And then they hammer it. They have a stone and they have a big wooden mallet and they just have their folded cloth there and they're pounding the stuff. And that's what gets it shiny. So it almost looks satiny, but it's a regular tabby weave. And then in some cases they put on ox blood to get it a sort of a stiff, a red look. So it's amazing. You'll see the drapes of indigo cloth all over. You hear the pounding and you think I thought, oh, it's a metalsmith. Oh, it's a woman pounding her cloth. So, other questions? Well, yeah.
Just, how did you feel about how you were treated?
We cold called the first trip. We went to a village. Rames's friend wasn't there, so we just walked up another alley and walked around a corner, and there's old grandmother sitting on her front stoop doing her ikat. And we said, oh, can we watch? And we spent hours there. And the grandfather got out his suit that he hadn't worn since he was married and dressed up for us, and they dressed baby up, and grandmother brought out all her other things, and yeah, no, they couldn't have been nicer. Really, we just descended on them. We just went into their home, all these people surrounded. I don't know what they thought, but we thought, well, some of these people, it doesn't make sense to give them a book. They don't have any place to, but so we bought stuff from them. So that one guy who was pounding with the sole of the shoe, that's why I've got this piece, because 5 of the people said, okay, can you make one that's just one stage and then a second one that's the second stage, and we'll get both of them for teaching, and we'll buy them from you. So I think that was a way of repaying them. And those bubble necklaces that Phil and Donna got, they went to the plater and they got half of it plated. So they just dipped it in part way, so you can see both sides, because they wanted them as teaching things.
What did you say about the fabric that you're wearing?
It's tin, and this one needle, one thread book gives diagrams on how they do it. First, they figure out they have this white cloth and they have a blue piece of thread, and they do the pattern that they eventually want all these little things to be in. It's just a long stitch. Then they dye the cloth. Then they come back and raise that stitch up with a needle a little bit, and feed the strip of tin under it, and bend it around, cut it short, bend it around so it's a little tube. So each one of these is a little tube over a stitch.
Is that heavy?
A little bit heavier than regular cloth, but not all that much. Yeah.
So Mary, on the trip that we went on in 2007, we mostly saw the women selling the work, and the men were probably in the studios working. Did you notice that?
Yes. I call them the ladies. The ladies were always out in front of the hotel or always out in front of the restaurant. Yeah, usually it was women you saw. And then another thing the women do, we saw in a larger city on the street corners, there'd be a little cluster of these meow, or one or another kind of meow women, and they had a basket with every color thread you could imagine, and what they were there was to mend your clothing while you waited. And so when they were waiting for a customer, they were doing their embroidery. So I guess that's one way they can.
Those hats?
Those are elaborate pieces of cloth on their head. So,
Do they have any purpose other than just being fat like that?
For them, I'm not sure. For some of the meow I was seeing, the women, the old ladies especially, were always wearing a head cloth. And they were sort of getting bald. I think maybe that was part of it. But you always saw a head cloth on. And then in some cases, if they had some cultures have very nice embroidered hats, And if it's at all raining, they're going to put a cloth over it. So a lot of times I saw them wearing like towels. Yeah, over the hats.
But Mary, remember, we were on the
trail, yeah.
trail together, and these ladies were married, and they had the red hats.
Oh, okay.
Do you remember what they had?
Thank you. I couldn't remember all that, yeah.
But I remember they explained that to us.
Well, it's all ritualized, what they wear. So a unmarried girl, but marriageable age, I think is the one that they get all dressed up. After she's married, she wears much less jewelry. She still wears some, but it's a different type and less.
Would that be a dowry, or do you think they cash it in to get married or something?
I think they probably could. In most of those cultures, I bet they would. And a lot of those necklaces, some of them are just really heavy links. And you could easily sell a link or two and you have a shorter necklace and get through a tough spot. Okay, well, thank you very much. And you're welcome to come up and take a look.